I made this special recipe just for you, dear. The words, coated in a saccharine sweetness I had come to dread, were spoken by my mother-in-law, Dolores Harrison. She placed the pasta dish in front of me with a flourish, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing that never quite reached her cold, assessing eyes. The pasta looked nothing like the beautiful, bubbling baked ziti that my husband, Eric, was already tucking into with gusto. His was a masterpiece of melted mozzarella and rich, red sauce. Mine was wrong. It had an odd, grayish tint and a faint, metallic smell that made my stomach turn. My name is Laura Macaulay, and I am 39 years old. For the past 6 years of marriage to Eric, I had endured his mother's constant, insidious undermining. It was a slow-drip poison of its own kind, a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts designed to bleed me of my confidence and, ultimately, my place in the family. What I wanted was simple: to be accepted, to be loved, not as an acquisition for her perfect son, but as a daughter. But what stood in my way was Dolores Harrison, a woman who had made it clear from day one that no one, especially not a small-town teacher with a mechanic for a father, would ever be good enough for her precious son. The injustice I faced was her relentless campaign to drive me away, a vicious, calculated assault disguised as maternal concern. As I stared down at the suspicious-looking pasta, a cold dread settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with the strange odor. The smell was wrong, metallic, bitter, nothing like the fresh herbs Dolores claimed to use from her immaculate garden. Eric hadn't even looked up from his plate, completely absorbed in his normal-looking dinner. The fact that only I had received this special version made alarm bells ring in my head, a frantic, clanging siren that I could no longer afford to ignore. "What kind of herbs did you use?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain light and casual, a feat of acting I had perfected over the years. My hand, hidden beneath the damask tablecloth, was discreetly reaching for my phone in my purse. "Oh, just old family secrets," Dolores replied, her eyes glittering with something that was definitely not grandmotherly affection. "I thought you might appreciate something unique." My fingers found the record button on my phone's voice memo app. I pressed it, then slipped the phone back into my purse, carefully positioning the opening toward Dolores. Something about this entire situation felt orchestrated, deliberate. The way she watched me, waiting for me to take a bite. The way Eric seemed completely oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. This wasn't just another passive-aggressive dinner. This was something else. "So, you made this specifically for me?" I pressed, taking a small piece on my fork but not bringing it to my mouth. "Of course, Lauren. After all these years, I finally decided to share something special with you. Something just between us girls." Her smile stretched wider, a grotesque caricature of warmth, and I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. It wasn't with age. It was with anticipation. That was when I knew for certain. Whatever was in this pasta was not meant to nourish me. The metallic smell grew stronger as I moved the fork closer to my face, pretending to savor the aroma. I could now see the tiny green specks scattered throughout the dish more clearly. They weren't basil or oregano. They looked more like the moss that grew in damp, forgotten corners of the woods, or worse. I set down my fork and smiled back at her, a mirror of her own feigned sweetness. "How thoughtful. Tell me more about this family recipe. I would love to know exactly what makes it so special." The tension in Dolores's dining room had been building for years. I remember the first time Eric brought me home to meet his parents in their sprawling colonial mansion in Richmond, Virginia. I was a 33-year-old elementary school teacher from a small town in North Carolina, giddy with love. My background was simple but honest. My father was a mechanic who always had grease under his fingernails but love in his heart, and my mother was a nurse whose compassion was the bedrock of our family. We lived paycheck to paycheck, but we lived with integrity. Eric's world was different. He was a successful architect, charming and sophisticated, a man who had swept me off my feet. His family, the Harrisons, were old Richmond money. Their home was a testament to that, filled with antiques and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Dolores had taken one look at me, a small-town teacher in my best, but still modest dress, and her face had shuddered like storm clouds rolling in. "So, you teach elementary school," she had said, the words dripping with condescension. She made it sound like I cleaned sewers for a living. How quaint. Eric had laughed it off later. "That's just Mom. She's a bit of a snob, but she'll warm up to you." She never did. The 6 years that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. There were the cutting remarks about my clothing, my cooking, my family's modest income, all delivered with a smile that made them impossible to confront directly. Eric, trapped in a lifetime of willful blindness, always defended her. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he would say, a mantra that began to sound more like an excuse than a defense. The warning signs had been escalating lately. About a year ago, Dolores had accidentally served me a drink that made me violently ill. I'd spent the night vomiting, my body racked with cramps, while everyone else, including Eric, stayed perfectly healthy. A trip to the emergency room yielded no answers, just a diagnosis of a severe, unexplained gastric event. Dolores had been the picture of concern, wringing her hands and blaming a bad batch of ice. Eric had believed her, of course. Then, a few months later, came the incident with the homemade cookies. I'd brought a batch of my mother's famous chocolate chip cookies to a family dinner. Dolores had offered me one of her own special, oatmeal raisin cookies instead. They tasted strongly of soap, a bitter, chemical flavor that I spat out into my napkin. When I discreetly mentioned it to Eric, he'd sighed. "Mom must have confused the vanilla with the dish soap. She's getting older, Lauren." But it was the disappearance of the stray cats that truly terrified me. Dolores had always made a show of feeding the strays that frequented her sprawling back garden. Now, staring at the gray, metallic-smelling pasta, I realized she had been practicing. The cats, the drink, the cookies, they were all experiments. And I was the final test subject. I set down my fork and smiled back at her. "How thoughtful. Tell me more about this family recipe. I would love to know exactly what makes it so special." "It's a very old recipe," she said, her voice a low purr. "The herbs are quite rare. I found them in the woods behind the house. They give the dish a very unique, earthy flavor. Most people cannot handle them, but I thought you might be tougher than most." Her words, captured perfectly by my phone, sent ice through my veins. Wild mushrooms or plants could be deadly. "This looks so different from Eric's dish," I observed, gesturing toward my husband's normal-looking baked ziti. "Oh, Eric has such a sensitive stomach," Dolores said quickly. "A little too quickly. I thought you might enjoy something with more robust flavors. You always seem so adventurous." The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, it was almost laughable. The recording was still running in my purse. I needed her to be more specific, more incriminating. I picked up my fork again and pretended to examine the pasta closely. "These green pieces, are they a special herb? I have never seen anything quite like them." Dolores's eyes lit up with unmistakable malice. The pretense was gone. This was it. "Let's just say they will give you an experience you will never forget." That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that Dolores was trying to poison me. The way she said those words, "an experience you will never forget," combined with that predatory gleam in her eyes, confirmed my darkest fears. This was not an accident or a misunderstanding. This was attempted murder. I felt the world shift around me as the full reality hit. My mother-in-law, the woman who had baked Eric birthday cakes and kissed his scraped knees, was sitting across from me, hoping to watch me suffer. "I need to use the restroom," I said, standing carefully. My legs felt unsteady, but I managed to walk normally to Dolores's opulent powder room. Once inside with the door locked, I immediately called 911. 911, what is your emergency?" "I believe someone is trying to poison me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I am at my mother-in-law's house, and she served me food that smells wrong and has strange substances in it. She made comments suggesting it will give me an experience I will never forget. I gave them the address and my name. While still on the line with the dispatcher, I quickly texted my friend, Danielle, who worked for the Richmond Police Department. Danielle, emergency at Eric's mother's house. Think she is trying to poison me. Police coming. Can you check if anyone is available who knows me? Then I flushed the toilet for effect and returned to the dining room. Dolores was practically vibrating with anticipation. Feeling better, dear? Much better, thank you, I said, and to her delight, I sat back down and picked up my fork again. Before I try this wonderful creation, could you tell me exactly what those green things are? I want to savor every ingredient. Dolores's smile turned predatory. They're special herbs I found in the woods behind the house. Quite rare. Most people cannot handle them, but I thought you might be tougher than most. Her voice, dripping with venom, was now a permanent record in my purse. My blood ran cold. Special herbs from the woods? I repeated slowly, making sure my phone caught every word. And you found these yourself? Oh yes, Dolores said proudly. I spent weeks researching which ones would be perfect for you. I even tested them on some of the stray cats that come around the yard. My heart stopped. She had just confessed to testing potentially lethal substances on animals. The casual way she mentioned it, as if discussing the weather, made my skin crawl. This woman was not just vindictive, she was genuinely dangerous. Eric was obliviously scrolling through his phone, completely missing the horror unfolding at his own dinner table. Just then, I heard car doors slamming outside. Dolores frowned and moved toward the window. Who could that be? She muttered. Maybe a package delivery, I suggested innocently. The doorbell rang, followed by firm, authoritative knocking. Richmond Police Department. Dolores went white. She spun around to stare at me, and I saw the exact moment she realized what had happened. The fake sweetness drained from her face, replaced by raw, untamed fury. You called the police? She hissed. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by a concerned-looking Danielle. Lauren, Danielle said, her face grim. Are you hurt? Not yet. I didn't eat any of it. I gestured toward the dining room. The evidence is still on the table. And I have a recording of her confession. Officer Martinez, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stepped inside. Ma'am, I am going to need you to step away from the kitchen and dining area while we secure the scene. Dolores finally found her voice. This is outrageous. Lauren is lying. It is just herbs. Then you would not mind if we test the food, ma'am? Officer Martinez asked. Of course not. Test away. It is perfectly safe. But her bravado cracked when I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Her own voice filled the silent, opulent room. They are special herbs I found in the woods behind the house. I spent weeks researching which ones would be perfect for you. I even tested them on some of the stray cats. Eric's face went ashen. He looked from the recording to his mother, to the 2 plates of food, and I watched years of willful blindness finally shatter. Mom, he whispered, what did you do? Dolores's composure completely crumbled as her own words echoed through the living room. She had not expected to be recorded, had not planned for the possibility that her victim might be smart enough to gather evidence. The mask of the loving mother-in-law slipped away entirely, revealing something vicious underneath. She made me do it, Dolores shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. She stole my son. She turned him against his own family. Officer Martinez remained calm as he took notes. Ma'am, I need you to remain quiet while we document the scene. Anything you say can and will be used against you. I do not care. Dolores was spiraling now, all pretense abandoned. 6 years I have watched her poison Eric's mind against me. 6 years of watching him choose her over his own mother. I gave birth to him. I raised him. And he throws it all away for some nobody teacher. Eric looked like he had been struck. He kept staring at the two plates, at the obvious difference between them, as if seeing his mother clearly for the first time. Mom knew. Actually tried to. He could not finish the sentence. The hazmat team arrived 20 minutes later, along with a specialist from the medical examiner's office who could identify unknown botanical substances. They set up equipment in Dolores's pristine kitchen, while Eric and I sat in stunned silence in the living room, watching our marriage implode in real time. I should have seen it, Eric kept saying, his voice a broken whisper. The cat's disappearing, you getting sick after eating here, the way she always made you different food. God, Lauren, what kind of person does that make me? I studied my husband's face, really looked at him. The shock was genuine, the horror was real. But so was 6 years of choosing to believe his mother's explanations instead of trusting his wife's concerns. Danielle came back from the kitchen, where she had been observing the evidence collection. Lauren, they found several different plant materials in your pasta. Some appear to be pokeweed berries, which can cause severe gastrointestinal distress, convulsions, and potentially death. Others they're still identifying. Pokeweed, Eric repeated numbly. We learned about that in Boy Scouts. It is highly toxic. Just then, Officer Chen's radio crackled, and I heard the dispatch mention finding 3 deceased cats buried in Dolores's back garden. My stomach turned. She had not just tested the poison, she had perfected it. The trial was a media sensation. Debutante mother tries to poison daughter-in-law, made headlines across Virginia and beyond. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence: the contaminated food, the notebook full of poisoning research, the deceased cats, and my recording of her confession. The most damning evidence came from the veterinarian who examined the deceased cats. All 3 had died from the same combination of toxins found in my pasta: pokeweed, foxglove, which affects the heart, and what appeared to be destroying angel mushrooms, which cause catastrophic liver failure. This was not someone randomly picking plants. This was someone who researched exactly how to cause maximum damage. The specialist from the medical examiner's office emerged from the kitchen, carrying several sealed containers. She also brought out a composition notebook, filled with Dolores's careful, looping handwriting. Detective Walsh, she called to Danielle. You need to see this, dear. We followed her back into the kitchen, where she had laid out samples of various plants on sterile sheets. This is definitely pokeweed, as I mentioned. But there is also foxglove, which affects the heart, and what appears to be destroying angel mushrooms, which cause liver failure. This was not someone randomly picking plants. This was someone who researched exactly how to cause maximum damage. She held up the notebook. Your mother-in-law has been documenting her experiments. She opened it to a random page. Danielle read the entry aloud, her voice tight with disgust. Lauren ate approximately 1/3 of the cookies before stopping. Next time, use less foxglove and more pokeweed. The bitter taste is making her suspicious. Eric made a choking sound. His mother had been trying to murder me for months, documenting her attempts like a scientist conducting research. Eric testified too, his voice breaking as he described finding his mother's research notes after the arrest. She wrote about my wife like she was a laboratory animal, he said on the stand, tears streaming down his face. She documented dosages and reactions. She was trying to find the perfect amount to kill Lauren without it looking suspicious. The most chilling evidence was the notebook. Page after page of observations about which plants caused which symptoms, how much was needed to cause illness versus death, and most chilling of all, specific notes about me. Dolores's defense attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, brought on by empty nest syndrome and medication interactions. But the detailed notebook, spanning 18 months, destroyed any claim of a spontaneous mental break. This was calculated, methodical, attempted murder. I testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through every suspicious meal, every unexplained illness, every time Dolores had offered me something special, while everyone else ate normal food. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison. At 68 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Justice had been served, but the damage to my marriage was irreparable. Eric and I divorced 6 months after the trial. Despite his genuine remorse and horror at what his mother had done, I could not forgive 6 years of him dismissing my concerns as paranoia. Every time he had told me I was imagining things, every time he had made excuses for his mother's behavior, every time he had chosen her word over mine, it all added up to a fundamental lack of trust that I could not rebuild. "I am so sorry," he whispered, his eyes filled with a pain that I knew was real. "I should have protected you. I should have seen what she was doing." But sorry would not undo years of choosing his mother's word over mine. Sorry would not bring back the cats. And sorry would not erase the fact that I had been living with a woman who wanted me dead, while the man who had vowed to protect me looked the other way. I moved back to North Carolina, to a small town outside Charlotte where nobody knew about the case. I wanted anonymity, peace, and distance from the circus my life had become. The settlement from the divorce gave me enough money to take time off from teaching and focus on healing. But healing was complicated. I had nightmares about contaminated food. I could not eat at restaurants without wondering if someone in the kitchen wished me harm. Trust, once shattered so completely, was not easily rebuilt. Slowly, though, I began to reclaim my life. I started volunteering at an animal shelter, finding comfort in caring for creatures who had been abandoned or abused. I took self-defense classes. I learned to garden, growing my own herbs and vegetables in raised beds where I could control every ingredient. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. The little voice that had told me something was wrong with that pasta, the same voice I had learned to doubt during 6 years of being told I was paranoid, I learned to listen to it again. Dolores had tried to destroy me, but instead, she had freed me from a marriage built on willful blindness and a family that saw me as expendable. Looking back on that terrifying night and the journey that followed, I realized that surviving her poison had taught me the most valuable lesson of all. My life was worth fighting for, and I would never again let anyone convince me otherwise.